to move to our welcome page. And I just want to say David Takle has been a frequent guest here on our Pastors Weekly, and very popular guest because David brings just a lot of wisdom and experience to the table here. And so I'm always thrilled to have David back. David is a pastoral counselor. He's a teacher. He's an author. He's got kingdomformation.org is his website. And today David's going to talk to us about how to care for the pastor's soul. So welcome, Mr. David Takle.
Well, thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone to this presentation. And I hope you can. Looks like you can all see my screen. You know, I probably don't have to tell you that pastors are expected to give out quite a bit. Many times, your job includes being on call virtually 24/7, and you just deal with a lot of issues on a daily basis. For a lot of pastors, this can lead to burnout and all kinds of challenges. So what I want to talk about is this today. While pastors are very busy taking care of everybody else and working on feeding their congregations, who's taking care of the pastor? How do you take care of the pastor's soul? And we're going to begin by just taking a look at what does it look like when your soul is not being cared for. Of course, one of the obvious ones would be just a heaviness or a weariness that kind of sets in and tires you out. Your body feels tired and your soul feels tired. We experience a lower capacity. Things that we can normally deal with can easily overwhelm us. We just don't have much capacity to deal with day-to-day issues. We might begin to feel more distant from God. We feel less like praying. Feels like God's just nowhere to be found and we're on our own. And our soul begins to languish. It's like that psalmist who says, I'm in this dry and weary land where there's no water. And it just feel parched. And we also find ourselves being very easily triggered. And when that happens, we start reacting to people instead of taking the time to respond gracefully and carefully and think through how to stay relational. And I'm sure we could make a long, long list of characteristics of what it feels like when our soul is not being cared for. And in contrast to that, let's take a look at what it feels like when our soul is being cared for. What does that look like? Well, of course, we're more joyful. Life seems good. We have a sense of well-being, and that we're okay. And even when things are kind of confusing around us, we just know who we are. We're more aware of God's presence. He feels close to us. In fact, he feels relationally available to us. We can really feel connected. And much of the time, our soul might even feel like we've just had a really big meal. And the sense of satisfaction and goodness. And our responses towards others are much more graceful and thoughtful. And again, we could probably list quite a few things, quite a few characteristics of what it looks like when our soul is being cared for and is in a good place. Well, then that brings us to a very important question, but one that's kind of easy to pass by, and that is, do we have a strategy for taking care of our own soul? And the reason we need to ask this is that a surprising number of pastors just assume, you know, everybody else's needs come first and I come last on the list. And maybe they haven't even considered that their soul needs really do matter. Or they may have thought that at one time and taken care of themselves. But over time, it just sort of gets pushed to the back burner. And we just sort of feel like all the demands on us have to come first. And I think some pastors hope that that since they're doing Bible study all the time to prepare their next sermon, prepare their next project, and all the ministry they're doing, that somehow all this study they do will sort of spill over and take care of their own emotional life and spiritual life. But see, the truth is, unless we are intentional and deliberate, our soul will begin to look like that beat-up boat we saw in the first slide. And then when we're all worn out, we start acting more like a program director instead of a minister or a pastor. So, excuse me, we're going to take a few pointers here and take a look at some ways to build a strategy of soul care. Offer some thoughts on how we can be more strategic in this process. This is going to fall into two categories. Some of the resources that we have available to us, we can really think of as being more pragmatic or structural resources, things that we can draw on from our natural human abilities and put into place. But there's also some very important personal and spiritual resources that we can draw on to care for our soul. And now under the what would be more than pragmatic is the life model talks about this all the time. We need to learn how to quiet and rest often. Take breaks during the day, and a few deep breaths, and get out and take a look at the sunshine. Just push everything away, and for a few minutes, remember who you are and whose you are, and just push all of that, all those demands out of your mind, and just soak in the goodness of God. Dr. Wilder often talks about the need to oscillate between intensity and rest. And this builds strength, and it's good for your mental health. We really need to take this seriously. And even if we have to set a timer that tells us, okay, it's time to take a break. We also need to set some real boundaries. Now, a lot of times, people don't expect pastors to set boundaries. They want them to be available all the time. They want you to answer your cell phone when they call. But we really do need to think about how to use our phones and how to see who's calling, and let the phone message take care of some of this stuff. Set up a Sabbath rest day. Some pastors take Monday off or Tuesday off. And when you have that day, have an agreement with your spouse or your family or whoever you're with. We're not going to talk about church business today. This is our day to receive. This is our day to be refreshed and pay attention to what's good for us. Even at work, if you're being interrupted constantly, it's time to have a gatekeeper. You need someone who will screen calls and protect you from the constant barrage that would sap your strength. It really is okay for pastors to set some boundaries. Another thing I would say is to be careful to develop a pastoral care team. In most cases, a pastor simply doesn't have the time to manage all the long-term soul care and counseling that can be laid at your feet. You need to be able to refer people out. And there's also, part of your job is to train your people to minister to one another so that not everything falls on you. It's good for them to learn how to give life and be part of ministry. So let them make some of these hospital calls. Let them go to funerals on your behalf and with your blessing. If you've ever heard of Stephen's ministry, that's very worthwhile to look into. How do you train your lay people to come alongside those who need some help? And this is very important. This is a great way to allow you to delegate and offload some of the demands that you have on your time. It's a great way to take care of yourself. Have a hobby. Do something fun. Practice music or sports or make pottery or do something. You need an avocation, something that has nothing to do with your ministry that you can do on your Sabbath day, and for refreshing, just for creativity and joy. And above all, take good care of your marriage and family. You know, all you have to do is talk to a few pastors' kids or missionaries' kids and listen to their stories of how they got left in the dust when dad or mom were off doing ministry and everybody else came first. So make sure you take care of your family. This is a way of taking care of your own soul. And one way, one of the pieces of this is to make sure that your spouse has someone they can talk to other than yourself, where they can vent and talk about what's going on for them in a safe and confidential place. And now we could go on and talk about some other just very basic, pragmatic steps we can take. Well, let's turn our attention to some of the spiritual resources. Now, I can't stress this enough, that we need daily conversational prayer with God. You know, as a pastor, you have a God-sized job, and you can't do it unless he's pouring into your life. And the Bible study you do to prepare for the next sermon doesn't count. You need to spend time with God with absolutely no agenda other than your own spiritual health, to feast at God's table, let him pour into you and feed your soul. In fact, I would go so far as to say this needs to be in your job description, that you part of what you're being paid for is to spend time with God and have him pour into you so that you can pour into others with the overflow. And talk to your elders or whoever's in charge of your employment, and put this in your job description, that you spend time with God every day. And relentlessly, I would say relentlessly pursue your own healing and restoration. It's so often tempting to think that the greatest problems that we deal with as pastors are church-related. They're the financial problems, procedural problems, relational and communal problems. But see, in terms of your own ministry, the greatest problems that you face can come from your own unhealed places. Because if we don't clear these out, they will wear us out. They will wear us down. And being a minister doesn't mean we've arrived someplace. You know, there's not just a period of training where we got the skills we need, and now it's our turn to do all the giving. We need to relentlessly pursue our healing. This is a lifelong process. A great resource I would highly recommend, if you haven't read Carl Lehman's Outsmarting Yourself, that you buy this book and, just short of memorizing it, really digest what it has to say, because we need to be able to identify the things that trigger us and take them to God and get those cleaned out. This is absolutely huge. And beyond just healing these things so they stop wearing us out, healing changes us in ways that we can't even begin to anticipate. We learn things about the goodness of God. We learn about how God works in us for our own good. And this will actually change the way you minister to others, the way you preach, and the way you talk about, the vocabulary you use will all change as you discover more and more of God's healing as you go. Now, the other thing I'd want to add to that, is closely related, is to practice transparency before God. This is very important, because most pastors, unless you're in some kind of very unusual group, most pastors will find that full transparency publicly is just not possible. Even though we can model some level of transparency and show them how to walk through hard times, there's some discretion needed and discernment needed in how you do that publicly, because a lot of our people in our congregations need to see us as being upstream from them, and too much transparency can destroy their trust in us. You know what I'm talking about. The problem is that whenever we practice some kind of limited or guarded transparency with people, it's easy to carry that over as just our modus operandi when we're starting to talk to God. But we need to drop those boundaries in our relationship with God. It's like in Psalm 139 where the psalmist says, search me, O God, and know my heart. We need to just allow God to probe deep in our life so that we can get this healing that we need. We also need to find another person, and this would be other than our spouse, with whom transparency is possible. Someone who's safe, encouraging, someone who will check in on you and challenge you, because keeping everything to yourself has a way of wearing down your soul. We need to keep this in mind. And then I would also say we need to develop a trusted intercessory team that we can share sensitive information with, keep them up to date on what to pray for. And I want you to take this really seriously, because we are in a spiritual war, and we need to be covered in prayer. So this is important for the protection of your soul. And then finally, I would say that as much as possible and as much as is prudent, we need to focus on the process and leave the outcomes to God. Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, but it was God who gave the increase. And of course, this doesn't mean that we're passive in any way. It just means we need to make sure we know what's our part and what's God's part. And this is true whether we're dealing with a conflict in our congregation or launching a new project or whatever it is. We need to be sure that we stop when we have done our part and that we don't try to control the outcome. So to just kind of wrap this all up, I want to emphasize that caring for your own soul is not a selfish act. In fact, if you want to minister well, it's not even optional. And my hope is that something I've said here has encouraged someone to just be more deliberate about taking care of their own soul. And with that, Chris, I'm going to pass this back to you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Wow, we have a lot of gems to talk about here. David, you've given us a lot to think about. I'm going to put myself on the camera here, so maybe other folks will want to join in at some point. If you have webcams, at the very least, you can see my very short haircut today. All right. David, let's talk here. You've just said so many things. I was taking notes as we were going along, and I got to say, there's a lot of notes on my page. I really want to highlight something for our friends today that you said about the need for rest and giving ourselves permission to rest. It reminded me when I was pastoring, and I had a long to-do list, as most of us pastors do. And I remember, David, I tried to take this advice of having a Sabbath every week. And I have to confess, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because I really tried to set boundaries for myself, an entire day to rest, to get away from work, to get away from my phone and my computer and all those kinds of things. And I have to say, I felt like I was counting down until that Sabbath was over because I had so much work to do. And yet, after practicing that for a few weeks, I found that if I didn't take a rest, you know what? I missed it. I missed that day, and I felt it that whole week.
You start to learn what it's like to have the refreshing, and then when you lose it, you can feel the wear on your soul.
Totally, completely. And so what you're saying here, I'm so excited because you've given us a lot of practical steps that we need as leaders and pastors, because when we're in the eye of the storm of our work and our busyness and our overwhelm, we need someone like you who can come along and say, hey, here's some steps, and start out with these steps. So, wow, you've given us a lot here. I just want to I want to move along here to try to get our friends engaged here, because I suspect others like me are chewing on some of what you said and thinking about, how does this apply to my life and my ministry? What does this look like for my week? So one of the questions, David, I want to put out there for our friends today is, what kinds of barriers do you face in regard to caring for your soul? So friends, if you have a way to speak with a headset, a webcam, just Denny's able to help you out if you can raise your hand.
Okay, looks like Jerry's got his hand up. Jerry, are you there?
Yeah.
Jerry, welcome,
Yes.
sir.
Hi, Chris. Hi, David. You know, Chris, I had to almost chuckle as you testified to rest being a discipline, because in our society we are so driven, and our identity gets wrapped up in what we do and what we accomplish, rather than just being a people of value before God.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
I thought it was great you brought that up.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that's going to resonate with all of us at some level. Is society doesn't exactly encourage rest, and for most of us, even the climate of our churches might not encourage that important ingredient. And so, David, I'm glad the flashlight is shown on this particular topic today.
Yeah, and I would add to that if we're going to teach our people how to live a balanced life, we need to practice it ourselves.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a question from somebody. Mary says, what if there's no one to help you to deal with your issues that you trust? If you don't have that trusted friend?
Good question.
Well, for starters, I would make it an issue with God and my intercessors, that you need to be led to someone who's either upstream from you or someone that you can trust. You might look to another pastor in another congregation that you've had some collaboration with in the past that you can trust. You really do need to ask God to sharpen your antenna and help you to identify someone that God brings into your life where this will be possible. It's definitely a crucial part of taking good care of yourself. So it's worth putting the effort into it that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
It may not happen accidentally. You may have to begin, taking some pastors out for coffee and trying to, feel them out and see if these are good, trustworthy people that you can do this with.
Okay.
Good. Very
All right,
good.
and in answer to your... Go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to move on to the next question, but you can keep
I
going.
would just like to inject also I would just like to add to that the one thing you don't want to do is to grab a relationship that would resonate with you rather than synchronize with you. I say that in the context of you don't want to just get together with another person that can just, the two of you can just amplify each other's pain or issues in your life, but to actually look...
That's a very good point.
Good point. Yeah.
But to actually look for someone, like even out in the congregation, maybe there is somebody who you see value in how they handle their family. Maybe you see how they're life givers in the body, to where you can just kind of put out those feelers that way also.
Now, are you guys suggesting that as a pastor, I have permission to receive?
Wow. Yeah, in fact, one way to follow up on your suggestion there about finding someone who will actually challenge you and lead and help direct you, you might consider finding a spiritual director. And again, that's usually there's some fee involved. I think that's something that the church can pick up, frankly, as part of your ongoing training and care. Should be one of your benefits in your position. You
So
need
David,
pastoral care.
So David, are you saying like a life coach?
Absolutely. Or spiritual director.
Now, Sandra has just typed in that sometimes you might need to look outside of the box and look for someone that you can only maybe Skype with or on the phone with.
Yeah.
Someone from the past that you don't live near, but you can still communicate with.
That's certainly a step up from nothing, I'll tell you that.
Yes, yes. And I really appreciate what you guys are saying here, and I appreciate Sandra's point as well, because really as pastors we are so focused on giving, and there's a pressure. We feel the weight, we feel the responsibility. So really what you guys are talking about, and David, what you're also highlighting is really giving us pastors and leaders the opportunity to look for those resources and to receive instead of feeling like we have to give all the time.
Yeah. Not only permission, but this is essential.
Wow.
Or in another 5 or 10 years, you'll be driving a bus instead.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
All right. David had a comment there about your question. What kinds of barriers do you face in regarding to caring for your soul? He said, probably not the only one to say this either, all the time is for caring for others and no time is left for myself.
Yes.
Yeah, that's that hard part of setting boundaries and setting up a Sabbath day where someone else fields your calls for you. You really do have to be serious about this. And I know that'll be a disappointment to some of your people, but if you don't have this for yourself, you will wear out. It's not if, it's when.
So running the red lights sooner or later will get us not only a ticket but into an accident.
Yeah.
So and David, if I can follow up, is that fairly common in your experience? Do pastors that you run across tend to have a hard time with this particular issue?
Actually, the research shows pastors have a notoriously low quality devotional time and very little rest. Those are two major factors. And the statistics are also really telling in terms of the dropout rate of ministry. Just leaving seminary. Within 5 years of seminary, I don't know, it's like 75% of people are doing something else.
Yeah, you're right. I've heard that.
It's
alarming.
huge.
And burnout is one of the big causes, is it not, for those who end up going out of ministry in some way?
And again, there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is not caring for your own soul. Part of it is not training your people formationally. If your pastor's job is to try to constantly motivate your people to do things they don't want to do, you're going to burn out. You just can't get past that. But when you start teaching your people formationally and helping them engage with God in ways that transforms them, then your job is a joy.
Wow.
So it depends a lot on many factors, but certainly soul care is a neglected area.
Yeah. Yeah. Denny, did you have any other questions before I move along?
No, there aren't any others here.
Okay. We got another one here I'd like to throw out there. Do any of these suggestions that David's introducing today, do any of these sound too hard to implement? Let's put that out there as you all are thinking about doing some of these things and following some of these steps. Does anything just seem too hard, too overwhelming? Let's be real here. What thoughts come to mind? What resistance can you think of?
They're thinking hard.
They're thinking. I'll just jump in
Well,
again,
I
David.
think we've heard a couple already, like,
Yeah.
you know, how do you find this person to confide in, and how do I get rest when everybody's, you know, banging on your door? So, yeah, this isn't necessarily easy. It's just necessary.
And David, I appreciate it, if I can jump in. You mentioned, as well as pastors, we have to deal with some of our own wounds, both the bad things that have happened as well as just some of our painful absences, which can stunt our maturity, as we've talked about in previous Joy Streams. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think I see that as a contributing factor to trying to take better care of ourselves. We might have some resistance to resting and to quieting, just because there's some areas in our own hearts and identity and character that might need to be addressed. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That really did resonate with me when I heard that particular point.
You know, one of the things that I've done with friends is I've actually, in this area of things that seem just impossible to implement, is just you know, repeat after me, no. And then, you know, for people to understand in any kind of a serving capacity, it's okay to say no. And then I try to look at the positive side of that, that if I'm not listening, and actually, as David's pointing out today, if I'm not taking care of my own soul as a servant, and within that context, I will have to say no sometimes. But then the beauty of that gives another person the opportunity to say yes.
Yes.
I like that. I like that.
It's very important that you train your people to do ministry. And then you can delegate and offload things. And they need to learn to do that. That's part of what it means to be a child of God, is to give life. So.
And the thought that I had as well, David and Jerry, as you guys are talking here, is how well can I actually take care of other people as well as my staff and my congregation and my family if I'm not taking care of myself? If I'm not putting gas in the gas tank, how far am I going to be able to drive ultimately? And,
right.
This is a life preserver as far as I'm concerned, what we're talking about.
Well, the sad thing is, what happens, Chris, is, in my opinion, you replicate the burnout. In other words, the people that are in the church, you know, I want to avoid my burnout, so I dump my burnout issues on other people, and you people have to do the ministry so I don't burn out. But the reality is, it's all coming out of the wrong motivations. That's a sobering statement right there.
Yeah, that is.
I have a question.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
Mary has a question. I guess she's not a pastor, but she wants to know how she can pray for her pastor, because she's noticed that she wants to be close with him. She said he's too afraid to deal with his pain. So how can she pray for him?
Great question. David, what do you want to share with Mary about that? Good question.
Well, I hear that the pastor's unwilling to share that or deal with it, or what was that?
Sounds like
he said it's too afraid to deal with his pain. Mary,
Well,
if I can unmute you. Let's see if
I would see how far he will go. I mean, approach him and say, how can I pray for you? What do you need? What would be helpful for me to pray about? And that'd be a starting place. If you have a pastor who has a lot of fear-based functions and fear-based fear bonds with people, then you've got a little deeper problem there, and it's very difficult. You don't want to be creating a little subversive group in your church that talks about the pastor's problems. So that's not helpful either. So discernment's going to be really tough here. It's a wonderful question. I haven't really thought too much about that.
Well, if I can jump...
Most of the places I've gone where I see the pastor's deeply wounded, I move on to another church. I have to admit that. So I haven't really given that a lot of thought.
You know, what comes to my mind, David, for Mary would be Mary, ask the pastor how you can pray for him. What are those things that's hindering him from basically receiving life, both giving and receiving life upstream and downstream? Because it sounds like, as David's saying here, that can quickly become a toxic environment for the pastor as well as the staff in the congregation.
Yeah, and if you ask him, like, specifically, what can I pray that would be helpful to you personally? Yeah. Not just to your ministry or to the church, but what can I pray for you that would be helpful personally? Then whatever he's willing to reveal, at least that's a place where he's teachable and willing to be, receive help. And so that's the thing to pray for, wherever people are most amenable to change. And
if I can toot my own horn here, I highly recommend these Pastor Joy streams as a resource to at least give the pastor a language for some of what's going on, and to hear from people like David and Jerry and other guests who are really putting words to some of the challenges that he might be facing and feeling. So that is actually one of the reasons we've developed these joy streams for pastors to be able to have the opportunity to look in the mirror and find some solutions.
And Sandra has typed in response to this. David, let's see if I can. David, we're getting that noise from you again. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, Sandra says, in regards to the intercessory team, as an intercessor, it's difficult when a pastor asks for advice but refuses to deal with his own healing persistently, thus leading to repeating cycles of problems in church. It does become toxic. Her solution, if after no change, is that she leaves the church, just like David said.
Yeah, that's a very frustrating place to be in when you continue to offer help, prayer resources, and the pastors or leaders aren't able to receive it. That is a very discouraging place to be right there. Unfortunately, probably more common than we would like to see as well. David, do you have any thoughts? I think we have you on mute here. Do you have any thoughts to that?
Well, I didn't hear that last statement about what her thoughts about the solution.
Well, if she keeps trying to offer help and support, and ultimately if the pastors don't receive it, then she'll feel the need to leave and not stay with the church if the pastor's not.
Yeah, there is a, like all helping professions, whether you're talking social work or psychology or the ministry, a lot of people who are deeply wounded go into those professions, hoping that kind of work will fill the void in their life. And so we will run into these people. You go to church, and lo and behold, the pastor has holes you can drive a truck through. And not that we're not all flawed, but there are some basic issues, like the willingness to grow and change, that have to be resolved. And if your pastor is in a place where he's not teachable, and that he stopped his recovery work, and he's no longer relentlessly pursuing his own healing, how is he going to lead other people in the restoration process? It's just part of you can't export what you don't grow at home.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why you would want to be in that church. And if you reach a point where you say, this isn't going to work because this pastor is not going to be a leader for me.
And David, you're really saying something here I think all of us need to consider, and especially as a pastor. I know I felt this particular responsibility in that with maturity, I can only grow people up to my level of maturity. And so if I'm not continually growing and healing and working on the things that you're telling us today, ultimately I have to face that reality is I can only raise children up, raise my congregation, raise those around me up to my level.
Right.
I can't give something that I don't have is what you're telling me today, right?
Yes.
That's good. Okay.
I have a comment from Wade.
And that's sobering. As a pastor,
It is.
that's sobering.
All right, I'm going to read what Wade has said. He says, as a former pastor, I have had people offer to help, but I didn't see them as safe people, so I didn't share with them as they desired. Then in time, they turned against me. I did have safe people other than the ones who pursued me. And also, there's a very real gender barrier, at least for me.
Well,
Wow,
yes,
those are some good thoughts.
you bring up the flip side of this issue, which is there's always people in your congregation that are offering unhelpful help. And they don't like the way you said something last Sunday, or they don't like the way the offering plate gets passed around, or they really would prefer the red book instead of the green book. And, you know, these kinds of things are unfortunately some of the stuff we have to deal with. And, you know, I guess you know, every pastor is going to have to find their own solution for this. But you're absolutely right. You need to learn to be very graceful, and at the same time, you know, set necessary boundaries. And the other part of this is there's a way that pastors can I don't know how to say this, train their congregations. In other words, if you preach grace and reconciliation and these kinds of things on a regular basis, and self-care and devotional time, and as you teach these things, it makes it easier to bring those into the conversation when you have these difficult people to work with. Whereas if this is like all foreign information, you know, where do you go? So
Wow.
we have to be training our people in a relational understanding of the Christian life in order to give us a way of managing some of these conflicts.
And I like that because you're creating a culture within
Yes.
that church
Yes.
that's safe.
Yes.
Yeah. I like that. That's very, very wise. Any other thoughts out there,
Chris,
Denny, before we scoot to, oh, is that Jerry?
Yeah. The other thought, Chris, is could you expand maturity just a little bit? Because I think for those that might be listening in that aren't really familiar with that, it's not the, you know, bite the bullet, grit, spit, look good in all situations, I'm maturity that you're talking about. You're talking about I think it would be good to kind of open up that definition of maturity.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things that the life model talks about specifically with maturity is that my body continues to grow, but that doesn't mean emotionally I'm keeping up with my body. And so, for example, as I'm biologically a father, so I'm a parent, emotionally speaking, I can still be at infant or even child level maturity, which will impact what I have to give, as David's been talking about. I can give out of what I've received. And so when we think about maturity, it's learning skills and finishing tasks along the way that helps me emotionally keep up with my body. So now that I'm in a 38-year-old body, as a parent, I can also have parent-level maturity. And what I'm hearing as well from David today with this whole issue of maturity is when I'm still making decisions out of fear, that's, for me, that tells me here's a good opportunity for me to work on something that might not be fully grown or developed or nurtured in me. And so if that makes sense, David, did you want to throw in anything onto those thoughts?
No, I think you covered that really well. It's, in the time we have here, it'd be hard to describe maturity, but it's not the autonomy and self-directed life that our culture thinks of as maturity. It's really the ability to be more and more relational in more and more complicated situations.
Yes.
And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Good. I like that. Yeah. Thank you, Jerry. It's good to bring some clarity to that issue. That probably deserves its own joy stream one of these days. I want to move on to this last question as we're running out of time here. In what ways, viewers, listeners, friends, are you encouraged by the focus on self-care? How are you encouraged by what David's sharing with us today, that we can actually give ourselves permission and have the expectation that it's not optional to take care of ourselves, that we actually must take care of ourselves? So what thoughts, what encourages you when you think about this?
While we're waiting for other people to raise their hands or type in their answers, I will share. I love the permission to be able to rest because it's hard. Not everybody realizes, they don't think you should rest as much as we should. So I like that my husband now respects that I need my quiet time with the Lord, and it's important and it's valued, and it may look like I'm just laying there with my eyes closed, but I'm not.
Yeah, right. That rest can be productive and fruitful in and of itself, and it's necessary. That's good. Yeah, I really like that permission to rest.
And Christine says, thank you for the permission and mandate that rest is not optional. Get freedom and permission.
That's just the point.
Amen.
Denny, that's just the point. I was going to give you permission to rest too, because we need to hear that from each other. And even if your eyes are closed and you're asleep, let's not forget some of the visions that came on people while they were resting.
Yeah, that's true. Andre says, I'm encouraged by the Word of God and by my longing and by seeing my need for God's encouragement. Sandra finds great freedom in this permission to rest. It should be everybody's Facebook status later on. You have permission to rest.
Amen.
Rest is not optional.
Amen to that. Amen to that. I always like to tell people when the different shifts of the priests who would work in the temple, one of the things they had to do, since there were so many shifts, they would alternate, week by week. And so what would happen when their shift was coming up, they would have to go to the temple, get purified, get cleansed, and then they would have to sit around for a week before they could even serve. And so you'd have a group of priests literally resting together, waiting for an entire week before they could start to serve. And what a wonderful image that God so values rest that he would set things up in the Bible and even just serving in his temple as a wonderful example of that need to rest before we work. So David, I think we could just get a lot of miles out of this.
Yeah, the whole idea of Sabbath is actually very, very radical. If you know anything about ancient culture, working 16 hours a day was necessary to survive. So the idea of taking off a day a week is just unthinkable in an agrarian culture like that.
Wow.
So God really thought this was important.
Isn't it one of the commandments?
Yeah.
Isn't it one of the commandments?
It is.
It is.
Funny about that. Be sure to rest. That's quite a command,
Yeah.
We always think commandments are about doing more. And I want to emphasize that, this isn't about doing one more thing or adding something else to your list. This is a way of perceiving life that we can only minister out of who we've become. And so we need to be careful about our healing, our connection with God, and all of the things necessary to continue to grow and be spiritually and emotionally healthy people.
And that's what Sandra said in your response to your last question there, is that she loves the clarification from an experienced leader about the importance of relentlessly pursuing your own healing.
Amen. And I just want to second that. And before we move on here, I think David said it well. We can only minister out of whom we've become. Let's let that sink in. I want to put that on my Facebook wall right there. David, those are profound words of wisdom right there. We have about 1 more minute before I have to move on. Any other thoughts for David? Anything you want to share before we move on?
Hebrews 11 makes it clear that entering into rest is an act of faith. And it's kind of, again, how do we go against that busyness? How do we, again, so it's that entering into the rest. Again, it's a very positive thing that God wants us to do.
I'm excited to go rest. All right, let me move on.
Yep.
We just have a couple minutes left. I hope people will visit David. I've given a couple websites for David. We've got another website here, lifemodel.org, where you can learn more about David's resources. He has several books. David's also a contributor on the Thriving Recover Your Life program. He, along with Ed Corey and Jim Wilder, worked very hard at bringing this training to your church and your community. One of the opportunities I'd like to highlight here briefly is just come visit us at Thrive. We've got training developed for leaders. You bring a friend, your spouse, a bonded partner, and we actually train you in joy skills. And believe me, there's a lot of rest as well in this training. We have 3 tracks. It's all hands-on. We only do 1 Thrive training in the States a year and 1 in Canada. Our Canada Thrive's already closed. It's happening in just a little over a week, but we still have registration open. So learn more about Thrive at thrivetoday.org. And Joy starts here. We're having a big Joy event here in Morton, Illinois as well this fall. It's all about starting joy in our churches, in our families, and in our schools. And you're just going to see joy as fundamental to being who God's created us to be and expressing that kind of life. Next week we have Dr. Jim Wilder back on a Joy Stream. It's been a little while since Jim's been with us. Jim's going to talk to us more about joy, and Joy starts here. And we're going to talk about some Father's Day service resources that I've been developing for you and your church. So join us next week and learn more about that. Then June 6th and June 27th, I want to hear your problems. I want to hear some of what you're dealing with. Because I'm working on resources and ongoing solutions for your ministry and some of the challenges that you face. So we're just going to get down to the nuts and bolts of what you need as a leader and a pastor. And then a new guest, Ken Smith, is going to be with us on July 4th. He's going to talk about 4+1 stories every pastor should ask their congregations to tell. Then Jerry, who we've heard a little bit from today, Jerry Petit Mermet is going to be with us and talk about leadership and the Emmanuel lifestyle. So we're going to have the opportunity to hear more from Jerry, and we're just going to have to get David scheduled as well here, David, because it always feels like we're running out of time and there's just so much good stuff to chew on when you're here.
Well, thank you.
We've just got to do that. And again, friends, Joy Starts Here book, that is out in the beta version. Looking at next week, we'll have our new version, our new beta with the assessments. And so highly recommend you take a look at that, as well as our Joy Starts Here website. We've got interactive forums. You can interact with us and each other. My friend Carol Brown has a Joy Starter blog. Take a look at that, joystarters.com. You might be seeing a theme here with all these joy resources. And, of course, Jesus in Mind Talks by Dr. Jim Wilder. Lots more information there. And learn more about the Thriving Recover Your Life resource that David and Ed and Jim have all just put together. This is fabulous training. I just can't recommend that enough. Great resources. So friends, looks like I'm running out of time. David, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being our guest. It's always fun to have you on here.
Thank you, Chris.
And
Enjoy it.
We're just going to have you back here. I need to get you on the calendar again.
Okay.
And Denny, thank you for all of your work. You make our job easier. So
right.
Bless you, and friends, thank you for being here. And we just pray that God will bless the rest of your day with lots of joy and rest. Remember to rest.